Welcome everybody to our POCIG Roundtable on the postdoc experience. We have four of us here today to just share experiences. And of course, this is always open to comments and questions along the way. We'll start off with brief introductions, and then I'll pose some guiding questions to our panelists. So for this afternoon, we have four panelists today. I'm Kareem Usher. I'm Assistant Professor of City and Regional Planning at Ohio State University. And then I'll turn it over to everyone to just introduce themselves, but we also have Dr. Akira Rodriguez at the University of Pennsylvania. We have Dr. Andy Hong at the University of Utah, and Dr. Benjamin Kristinger at the University of Oxford. From my vantage point here, I will move now to Andy Hong. Just a brief introduction.
All right, thank you. Nice to meet everybody. I've got COVID, so I might have some occasional coughs, so please excuse. So my name is Andy Hong. I'm an assistant professor at the City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. My research is very interdisciplinary, just like everyone else. My work is at the intersection of public health, urban planning, and transportation. And my path was more or less a meandering path than a straightforward path. And I think that's increasingly the case for a lot of the PhDs and the postdocs as well. But this trend has been something more of a normal in the science communities. I've seen some people lingering in their postdoc for 10 years even. Some people got lucky, they got a job, some people didn't. So this sort of meandering path has been with a lot of other disciplines. But I think the planning and it's starting to happen in social science as well. I think just because there are more demand than supplies, so you just have to find your own way and be strategic about it. I guess my postdoc experience is that, well, are we going to do an introduction first?
Yeah, that's introduction.
Okay, all right.
First, and then we'll come back around. No, that's perfect.
Okay.
I could move now to Dr. Rodriguez.
Yeah, thanks, Kareem. Thanks, Andy. Hope you feel better soon. Hi, everyone. My name is Akira Rodriguez, and I'm assistant professor of city and regional planning at the Weitzman School at Penn. I did my postdoc at Penn as well, and I was also a lecturer there. So I guess perspective that could be useful here is that I was not leaving Philly. So here, people realistically are bound to place. We're planners, we know that. So I'm happy to sort of talk about that experience and what it's like to be strategic when you're in a pretty restricted geography where supply far exceeds demand of PhD students and graduates there. So happy to talk about that. Thank you.
Nice. I'll turn it over to Ben for a brief introduction.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Chrisinger, and I'm associate professor of evidence-based policy evaluation at the University of Oxford. I should say I'm pre-tenure. It's a strange way that they have the titles. So I am not tenured. I am up for tenure this year. But yeah, that is my title. I did a postdoc in the School of Medicine at Stanford, and then was a PhD student in city and regional planning. So I feel like I've gotten further and further away from planning in a way, but still consider planning home in many ways. And yeah, I guess also it's maybe in distinction to Akira was not geographically bound, and so that took me quite far away, and even far away from the U.S. So maybe I could speak a bit about that kind of thing too, of making the leap. And I know Andy can talk about that as well. So the sort of international sort of step after the postdoc. But yeah, happy to be here.
All right, thank you. I guess my first question to our panel is sort of how did we get to this postdoc position, and then they started to describe that in terms of the meandering path. I can start off briefly. So I also did my postdoc at Ohio State University, actually even before I completed my dissertation, before I even defended it. So in that sense, I was fortunate. I did 1 year postdoc at the Kirwan Institute here for the study of race and ethnicity. So I did a year here. While I was completing my dissertation, so that year I did that, and I also was invited to join projects that the Kirwan Institute had ongoing. So I was able to join at least 2 projects. Remember, we completed one for a client down in Florida, and we produced a report from that. So it was sort of, my postdoc was almost overlapping with my graduate work for a year, and then right after that I moved into tenure tracks. So in a sense, I had a fortunate experience in that way. I would say relative to maybe other experiences. Andy, you wanted to share?
Yeah, so I guess my journey is a bit out of place, but I guess increasingly that's like more of a common for a lot of the PhDs. So I did my postdoc at UBC with one of the a star researcher named Larry Frank. He's a rock star in our field, in this urban health field, and I was lucky to get to know him way before I applied for a postdoc. And my postdoc opportunity came out of nowhere. Actually, there was no postdoc opening or anything. It was more like an informal. But then, even before learning about that opportunity, I already secured a position, not a tenure track, but a research fellow position in Singapore. So I was actually about to move to Singapore and move on my family. But then I talked to other people about my next career move or anything, and someone who was very close to in my circle told me that if I move outside of the US, geographically you're sort of going far away from the US. If you want to come back to US, I might as well try to stick here and geographically. So upon hearing that, I actually just emailed Larry and just have a chit chat and see how things are going. And one thing led to another. He told me that he's looking for a postdoc. So it was very informal. I already had a position. I secured a position in Singapore. I was ready to move. But then all of a sudden he told me about this postdoc position, and he asked me if I want to move to UBC and work with him. And I was kind of debating whether I should accept that opportunity or stay with my own opportunity with the fellowship in Singapore. I ended up taking the job at UBC, So that was more of a meandering path, what I was talking about. But the opportunities come and go. You always have to be more proactive about your future. And usually the postdoc opportunities, it's not advertised through formal channels. It's more like informal connection. It's about who you know. So, and the postdoc position is more like finding compatibility with the future supervisor. If supervisor likes your work, and if you like he or her work, then I think that's probably the best combination. But I just want to say that you just need to be very proactive about your postdoc opportunity if you're interested in getting a postdoc after your PhD.
Thank you. Akira?
Yeah, totally agree with Andy that a lot of the postdocs are by chance. One thing with postdocs is there can seem to be like a lot of them, but the funding structures vary widely. Sometimes it requires a department or a school to match what the university is providing. Sometimes it comes with teaching requirement. Sometimes it requires an individual to sort of fund and sponsor it. And so the funding, I think, is what makes it depends on who you know, and that sort of what may seem like a whisper network, but is really, I think, just the result of grant funding cycles of somebody will hear they get funding in like March, and it's like way too late to think about posting and creating a job announcement. And so they're like, oh, well, I know this person needs something, or, oh, this person's student needed something. Both of my postdocs were received because I applied for jobs and didn't get them. So I had come in and, people knew my work from my application, and at one of them, I had done a job talk, so people had gotten to know me. But another one was just, I had applied, it was Penn. I didn't even, get the first round interview, but there was this opportunity where the university would match it. I could teach a class on race and my topic of, so it was a low paying, but it was a postdoc that suited my needs. Again, because I wanted to stay in Philly. And so those are kind of the structural, I think, difficulties with the postdoc. Like the instability of the postdoc market is very, I think, closely tied to funding and to like targets of opportunities. So like the diversity scholarship or postdoc that I had.
Nice. Ben, share your experience.
Sure, yeah, and I would sort of agree with what both Andy and Akira said, and yeah, especially related to funding. I think that came up for my postdoc as well. So mine was funded through NIH, and it was a center grant. So there was a center at Stanford that was applied for on their own. It's called the T32 training grant, and so they are awarded from NIH this pool of money that they can then give out to multiple postdocs every year. So there's a couple of like institutions around the country that have these training grants. And so in the last year of my dissertation, I sort of made the choice that I was going to focus on postdocs. Like I was sort of in this planning public health sort of space, but like didn't have many public health sort of research skills, or at least as much as I'd want. And so it made the choices like I'm just applying for postdocs. So that is something I decided probably like, that kind of fall of the last year of my dissertation. And yeah, so it was just sort of like adding to this list of where I could find different health sort of related interdisciplinary health postdocs, faculty who might be potentially good mentors. And just, I guess, speaking also to the structure of the funding, like I feel lucky in a way because it was a center grant, you could be brought in and like work with multiple different people. You could do your own thing. So like I published, dissertation papers in my first year, that I was also working on other projects, but like if it was a different funding structure, I might have been brought in and then expected to do somebody's work, like on a bigger project, which again could be really beneficial for my career to get publications and things. but at least in the structure of the grant that I was on, it gave me space and time to kind of like set my own course for it was 2 years guaranteed funding with a third year that I did get, which was good. But yeah, so I agree with what's been said. I think the funding structure is very widely, and also the pay varies widely from institutions. So those are things to maybe bear in mind. But yeah, I'll leave it there.
Nice. I'll open it up to any other panelists. Like, let's talk about, well, how long were you in that position? And as Ben started us off here, the compensation, right? The pay. That's also, I guess, something we should talk about. If anyone wants to jump in.
I'll hop in. I had a 3-year postdoc, our sort of vice provost postdoc for diversity, where again, the university pays half and the department or school pays the other half. So not a very competitive fellowship as a result of the funding structure. But at the same time, it was 3 years, and it was the pay was very low. I started in 2016, and the pay was 45,000. So I wasn't doing anyone else's work. I got my own office. I got a research budget that was actually more generous than what I get as a faculty member at like $5,000 a year, and there was also travel money about $2,000. So $7,000 a year in funding was nice, along with the office space. And I taught one class. So eventually I started getting compensated for those courses that I was teaching. That was a way to sort of supplement my income. And I got an outside offer for a visiting position, so non-tenure track, that allowed me to negotiate the lectureship that put me in a higher pay class between 2 schools. So that was sort of my positioning. And again, very funding dependent, getting an outside offer. Luckily, the offer was for an institution in New York. And so the pay was just, automatically higher. That put me in a different conversation. And so those were helpful things, but it wasn't until my school is now the Stuart Weitzman School of Design, it wasn't until that like multi-million-dollar donation that I was able to get hired on the tenure track a couple of years ago, because the money just wasn't there. So that's my story, and I was actually sort of advised to do that approach of just sort of like sticking around and seeing like what sort of happened and opportunities arose. So again, if you're sort of bound by place, I think that's useful.
Nice. Andy or Ben?
Yeah, I can add. So the compensation, it was more like a salary position in my case. So I mean, compared to the fellowship that I was going to accept in Singapore. I mean, Singapore, they pay very, very competitively. So, but then the cost of living is very high. So that's another thing. So you have to think about, if you're thinking about international move, not only the pay matter, but the cost of living matters. So it was Vancouver, and at that time, the rate was quite nice. So I wasn't really struggling, because I was able to actually try to match what I would get in Singapore. So because I already have that position secure before getting my postdoc, so I was was able to leverage that. But I don't think a lot of people have that leverage unless you have already secured some position before. And mine, unlike Akira and Ben's position, mine was tied to funding, and it was not like a center grant or anything. So I was very much dependent on on the PI's funding situation. And I think it was important to have at least 2 years of funding for my postdoc. At least have that in the contract really helped me see myself through and be more strategic about my next move, because if it's just only 1 year, I've seen some postdoc opportunity that just offers 1 year. I don't think it's enough, because unless you're actually doing a postdoc in your own institution where you got your PhD, that you already have that relationship with the PI and everything, you're starting a new position and there's no protection for you, because you don't know that person, the PI doesn't know you. So there's some sort of, you have to spend a lot of time trying to build that relationship with your PI. So 1 year goes really fast. And even at 2 years, you barely know your PI. So sometimes it's really difficult to ask for a letter if you don't have that relationship with your PI. And what's the point of having a PI? I mean, doing a postdoc where you can't leverage the position for your next move. So at least having a sort of a 2-year postdoc position and have that in the contract. I think I started, looking at the contract more seriously with my postdoc, because the contract, it's the most important thing whenever you're starting a professional job. And sometimes people don't know that you can leverage or be more strategic about your what you ask, but you can, because postdoc is actually not just a continuation of your training, but it's your first step in, as a professional. So you have a little bit of leverage as an independent and a professional researcher, but then that comes with cost as well, because if you don't perform well, if you don't provide what the PI wants, then you'll be in trouble, because you'll be evaluated as a professional, not like just a PhD student. It's not like your advisor and PhD student relationship. It's more like you're being evaluated by your performance. So that's sort of a pros and cons when it comes to postdoc, but in my case, it was worth it.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what's already been said. I like on the length of the postdoc too. I mean, like I said, 2 years was kind of the offer that was put on the table. Actually, there's not a lot of negotiating you can do with the NIH. So it's sort of like they've got their grant, and like they can only pay out sort of what they've got. I will say that I was really lucky, because like the first year there, I was like paid what NIH pays basically, and they don't do a very generous cost of living assessment, and the Bay Area is insanely expensive. So that changed during my postdoc, like because of advocacy from students. So like props to the students that came before me, because they made Stanford say like you can't have a postdoc unless you pay them at least $50,000, which again, not much in the Bay Area, but it's like enough to like make it work. And it was for me with roommates and all the rest, but like which might not work for everyone's situation. I will say, so that like changed while I was a postdoc, and I'm really grateful for that. But like that's something to be aware of, is like the sort of going rate at some places is still really low, and maybe a bit more than like what you'd expect as a PhD student, which is wrong, but like it's the case. I agree with Andy too, just on the sort of like transition sort of like, a year, it's just like you're getting your PhD articles published, you're getting your feet wet probably in a new city, like it's like there's a lot going on. And like one big function of the postdoc is to show that you like operate in multiple spaces, like you're not just your PhD like committee chairs, like you know, like favorite child, you know, like when you're on the academic, like the tenure track job market, you want letters that are going to speak of like your independence as a scholar and like your ability to do new projects that aren't your dissertation. And like, again, like 1 year of postdoc, like that's cramming a lot into 1 year. And also like being on the academic job market, as many of you know, is like a full-time job in and of itself. So that also kind of eats into the time and space of a postdoc to like truly be on the job market. And I kind of like soft went on the job market in the beginning of my second year. And like by the time I was in the third year of my postdoc, that was pretty much like full-time applying to jobs. Like, yeah, I guess I'll just also say like there was no negotiation with the UK. So like that, I don't know if it's just my employer now or that's like a UK US thing, but like having 3 years postdoc experience, like by right gave me like extra like points on the ladder. But other than that, like there was no other negotiation that I got to do with my employer, and that was just the norm. So again, it's just like maybe an international, like a UK US sort of difference, but something that was surprising given all the, yeah, because you can ask for a lot. You can use your postdoc to negotiate for a lot, I think, in the US.
Yeah, thanks. I think we've all touched on a lot of the elements. I think my situation was, it was even, you know, had its uniqueness to it. So in a way, so my contract was, I'm finishing up my dissertation, and it's, someone spoke to this before. It's kind of, I think it's kind of like informal. It was kind of like informal at first, like it wasn't greatly like advertised or anything like that. And so I guess let me go back. So the way I got to my postdoc was, there was an ACSP sort of workshop at Ohio State. I was doing my PhD at Florida State, and they were inviting like late stage PhD students to do a poster to show your research, your dissertation research. And I almost didn't go. I was like, you know, I'm not finished my dissertation and all of these things. So, but someone encouraged me to go. I put together a poster. I flew up to Ohio, and I was showing my work, and the department chair liked my work, and she was like, "Well, did you apply for a position here?" I said, "No, I'm not ready. I'm too far. I'm not finished my dissertation." And they were like, "No, go ahead, apply, and we'll see." You know, so I did. And what came back was that, well, we can't offer you tenure track right now. We can create this sort of postdoc for the year, and after you finish that year and your dissertation, you move into tenure track. So my contract was kind of like twofold. Like I signed a contract saying for a year you're postdoc, and then you immediately have this tenure track position afterwards, which is, as I've learned, this is not standard industry procedure. But again, I think as everyone has pointed out, like these things can happen, right? Opportunities kind of arise and fall, and things kind of happen. And when I first got this message, I went to my my department chair at Florida State, and she was like, "Kareem, you know, don't try to make sense of this. These things just kind of, you know, opportunities kind of happen. You're just at the right time and right place for this to happen." And you know, because I was like, this can't be true, right? It's crazy. But so that's sort of how my experience went with that. But yeah, it's just been interesting. And I think someone else also mentioned, you know, just kind of like stay vigilant. Because I also applied to postdoc positions. I applied to UC Davis, I believe, and I applied to Vancouver, University of British Columbia. So so I actually was applying to this position, but you know, this one just kind of popped up. So just remain vigilant and sort of kind of like do your due diligence. And anyone wants to jump in with questions at this time before we move on a bit more with the panel? Looking at. Okay, so we could move on. We could ask our panelists to just speak on how did you transition out of that postdoc position? What was that like? How did you make the next move to the tenure track? And then maybe talk about the experience with your postdoc. Did that help or hinder you in your current tenure track position? Just open it up to anyone who wants to start.
Well, I can start. So I didn't get to the tenure track right after my postdoc. So there was another position that came out again out of nowhere, and it was kind of weird because it so the next position that I got was at Oxford, and that's how I met Ben again. So with my postdoc at UBC, and Ben was doing his postdoc at Stanford, and both his PI and my PI were in the same team. So we actually had a couple of research meetings together. Anyway, so it was my after the end of 2 years of my postdoc at UBC, and my PI was running out of his fund, and he could only support me 1 more year. So he was actually encouraging me to apply the other position as well. And I could have actually stayed 1 more year with him, but knowing that his funding is drying up, I had to look elsewhere. And I found the next position out of the blue. I was just searching some jobs in Times Higher Ed, and this particular position just came out of nowhere, and I was just reading the JD, and it was strikingly similar to what I was doing at UBC, and again, what Kareem was saying about, it's a lot of that has to do with serendipity. You have to be vigilant, you have to be proactive, you have to always be searching and checking out what other centers and people are doing. And I just applied to this position in Oxford, which is more like a lead research, like a PI level position. It was not a tenure track professorship, but it was good enough for me to advance my career. And it was more like a staff position at an institute, like a very large institute. And I applied knowing what it will entail. And one thing led to another. I went on an interview. My wife actually told me, like, why did you apply to Oxford? If since we're not going to move there, we're not going to move to the UK, period. And I just went on with the interview, and I told my wife I got the job, and she was not happy. I mean, she was, really ready to invest all her time in Vancouver, raise kids. And why should we need to leave Vancouver? And I just told her about this funding and opportunity, and it could actually give us a more secured position down the road. And I convinced her, and yeah, that's how I moved to the position in Oxford. And in a way, it broadened my network, it broadened my experience. I think that was probably the best move I've ever done. Actually, I never regretted, because if you just stay in one area, one position for a long time, you get stuck and your network is very limited. But if you start moving around, start meeting new people, making connections, you can really broaden your network and broaden your experience. And if I had never done it, I don't know if I would be able to secure a tenure track position here at Utah. So all these things, I guess in retrospect, played out very well. But at that time, there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of risk, and there was a lot of, convincing that it has to do with my family and my wife. Because I mean, I believed myself. I mean, even if I moved to Vancouver, even if I moved to the UK, I had a belief in myself that I could, secure a tenure track down the road. So that was more of a meandering path, but as long as you believe in yourself, as long as you have a strategy, as long as you have, you're vigilant about what you're doing, what others are doing. I think, it's just the time that matters. And just because that there's a lot of demand, but little supply, by nature, people are more likely to meander than, secure a tenure track right after they graduate. But as long as you stay focused, you'll make it. So that's all I can say.
Yeah, very nice. Ben, Akira?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there was some meandering, and I think it's worth mentioning too, like I applied to multiple postdocs and I got one. So that, that was my decision, the decision was actually, do I want to move from Philly to the West Coast? And at that point in my life, I did. So, and then similarly, in year 2 of the postdoc, I started pretty vigilantly following all the job boards and applying to jobs. It was a really unsuccessful year 2. I'll say that. There was nothing. I wasn't wholeheartedly putting myself into it, which I would say. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like the end of a postdoc where there's no more money left to sort of fire up the the job applications. So year 3 was really a lot of applications, and I don't want to frighten anyone, but I applied to probably 60 different tenure track jobs, and crickets, crickets. And so I don't know if it was the year or it was something about me, or I was applying to the wrong jobs, but I was really going for it. And I did get interviewed for a visiting lectureship. So it'd be one place it was 1 year, and then I got an interview somewhere else for a 2-year position, which I was starting to seriously consider, because they were also very clear this does not turn into a tenure track job, which is actually, I think, in distinction to Akira's experience and Kareem's experience, some places will be really clear, this is not going to be a tenure track job, so don't think that. At Stanford, it was the same way. They told me don't think that you're going to stay here as a faculty member. You've got to, maybe one day, but that day's not as soon as you finish your postdoc. So just to say, I did get interviews for those. I was eventually offered a visiting post, but I still had a few months left of my postdoc, and that was such a hard choice, to have a job offer, also have dozens of other applications out, and again, crickets, because these committees, they don't talk to you. They just let you wait, and it's painful. But to decide to turn that one down and keep waiting on the rest was a really, really hard choice. And yeah, I don't know. I'm glad I did it, but it was a big gamble. It was a big gamble. And then again, similar to Andy, the position description for the job I'm in now was it was like reading my CV. Like they wanted, you know, policy sort of evaluation experience. They wanted health, you know, health would be interesting. They wanted maybe some experience with like community-based trials, which that was what I was, you know, one of the labs I was working in at Stanford, like that's what they did. So it was just kind of like tick, tick, tick. This is, I can give them exactly what they want. Whereas some of the other jobs I was applying to, it's like, I can fit myself into the box that you've described, but this one didn't feel like that at all. So again, there's some significant serendipity to that. And there's a reason why like that's the job I'm like in now and like talking to you. Like, you know, it's why I'm sitting in the UK now. Because that was truly the one that like matched what I actually did and like the kind of research I actually do. So yeah, I don't want to make it sound more random than it is, because then it's like, what advice do we have to give you? But I think like Andy said, just getting yourself in the right sort of zone is helpful.
Yeah, interesting. I really enjoy these rich experiences. I know going through it, you know, it's always hard because you can't see the road far ahead of you when you're taking these chances. It's incredible. Akira, sure.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And also that it is really hard to give advice because a lot of this is like, I don't know, it's not random, but it's not, there are just way too many moving parts. And like, especially now that I'm on like the other side of like being on search committees, like I see how very random it is. And so it's like very like, when you have searches, you have people come in and they're all wonderful, but very different. So it just becomes this like preference, you know, like it's not like anything to diminish the quality of your work, which I think is really hard when you're getting those rejections, frankly. So I think like state of mind is actually really important. I think like other jobs, it's easier to get a job when you have a job. The thing that sucks about tenure track jobs is that everyone can compete for them. And so that makes it harder to come straight out. And so postdocs do gain a certain level of importance, but also if you do have the flexibility and you don't mind, you know, take a job that's like not every single thing is checked off. It's not like your CV is right in front of you, but it can often be easier to get a job when you have a job. And you'll see this with a lot of my peers, particularly relative to like senior folks. You see a lot more, I think, mobility and fluidity in different positions, including going back and forth between tenure track and kind of like postdoc fellowships. Because some of these fellowships are fairly prestigious. And so they give you that kind of like sabbatical that can transition you from one tenure track job to another. So that is like how I would think about this strategically. I always feel like the George Bush skit, like strategery. I was like, am I saying it right? But that's how I would, yeah. So that's how I would think about it. Like, it can, I just think like most things, I mean, we've all done like, well, we haven't all done, but we've done like this sort of peer review process. Like you can take rejection in this field very seriously and personally. And I like, a lot of the times I just feel like it's not personal at all. It's not a reflection on the quality of your work. It's really hard to get through PhD programs and publish. And so like, if you've done that, then like you've proven yourself. But having a job is like, it's just very competitive again for like a small number of jobs. And so thinking if it is something that you want to commit to for a tenure track job, just kind of thinking that it may take more than a year or 2 or 3 or 4. I personally, it was 6 years before I did a PhD to like when I started on the tenure track. So that is like my people in my cohort had tenure when I was like just starting. And so those are just things to like think about as you sort of make your decisions about post PhD life.
Yeah, as you were saying, Akira, I have a colleague from Florida State when I was in my program, and she was a year ahead of me, and it was hard for her to get a tenure track position. Florida State gave her 2 visiting positions, but those are temporary. It was like a year, and then she got a visiting position at Cleveland State, and then it was just kind of a run like that. She's back at Florida State now, but yeah, it's just very hard. One last thing, if you want to share on maybe how were you prepared? How did the postdoc prepare you for this new position? Was it helpful, or parts that weren't so helpful? And again, I know it's because experiences are so varied, right? I'm interested to hear our experiences there. Again, I'll also open it up to whoever wants to start first.
Before we talk about that, I think it will be important to, since we have a number of international students, I guess all of you are US citizens. So if you're not a US citizen or resident with green card, the status can be an issue. So if you don't have the status, then I was an international student. So if you don't have the status, then it's tricky to have a visiting position because it's not a full-time job, and rarely they're going to give you any any visa for that. Even if they do, it's just 1 year or a very short period of time. So something to consider is, I think it all goes back to the contract. So you need at least 2 years for your postdoc, and the full-time equivalent job that will allow you to stay in the US or stay in whatever country that you get a job. So you need to pay good attention to some of those nitty-gritties, the contracts, and whether you can actually think about transitioning to the next move. So I think the tricky part is, as soon as you start your postdoc, you have to thinking about the next move already. And it's even, it's better if you already have a next move and you want to leverage your postdoc to the next move, and that's great. But you already need to have a game plan even before starting your postdoc, because 1 year goes really fast and even 2 years goes fast. And you need to have a game plan in terms of how you would, unless you are extending your PhD and doing a postdoc under your current supervisor, if you're moving to another institution like me or Ben, you need to have a game plan even before you start your postdoc. And you need to think about your status, your contract, all these things matter. So you need to treat your postdoc as if you're starting a professional career at that time, and then you have to think about your next move right after. So it's a tricky situation, but in a way, you gain some time and to sort of reorient yourself, re-strategize yourself, and think about your core skill sets, and have that in mind even before going to the postdoc. And sometimes if you're hired as part of a project, you may be even thinking about that the project you're going to be working on, because maybe it's not something that you are passionate about, or if it's something that's outside of your expertise, and you may have to sort of rebrand yourself through that postdoc. So a lot of that hinges on having that sort of a game plan even before starting your postdoc, and then making it through and having that sort of independent, the pathway to independence rather than, postdoc is just a continuation of your PhD, just a training. I don't think that's a healthy strategy. So I just wanted to add that a little bit, just for the international students who are struggling to maintain their status. So again, the contract matters.
That's an excellent point to bring up. Thanks. I guess we're down to under 10 minutes. I wanted to open it up actually to the audience and see if they have questions they want to ask. It could be on what Andy just brought up. I was an international student too, but before my PhD, so I was able to I got my status changed before my PhD. But yeah, so let's open it up to the audience and see if anyone has questions or comments you could work through. If not, if anyone else on the panel wants to share any other thoughts. Yes, go ahead, Raksha.
Hi, thank you for the session. I just had a question kind of, there's like all of you have talked about, I'm currently in a postdoc and, looking at academia and non-academia, I guess. But my question is more about, all of you talked about sort of jumping from one place to another and sort of, if you're really committed to academia, sort of moving around and trying to make it work and, being creative about that. I guess I'm curious about kind of how that affected your projects, or did you have do you have like one long-term project that you've just done throughout like your visiting assistantships and your postdoc, and then you kind of like add these other projects as you go on? Or kind of how would you pitch that to, if you're in a job talk or something, like how would you show them that there is some sort of continuity in what you're doing and kind of, that it all makes sense together? I hope that was clear.
I mean, I'll just start. I would say, yeah, like I did pick up additional projects. So it was, I had my kind of dissertation theme. I did, looking at food access and food deserts and policy interventions. And so like there were like threads of that in the work I got to do in my postdoc. So, but it was like in the lab, they did a lot of citizen science. So I did a project that was using citizen science to look at healthy food access in a particular place. And so now on the job talk, I could say, yes, I do food stuff, but I also do citizen science, right? So, and there's this like logical thread that connects. I think with narratives too, like asking your mentor in the postdoc or like even your PhD mentor, like to reflect on your narrative and like your statements that you submit, like can be really good to help. Sometimes they can see that like higher level view that might be when you're kind of like in it, it's sometimes harder to scope out and like see like what's the bigger story here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think a lot of that has to do with branding too, because if you've been involved in one project and moved on to another project, you can still try to relate that as part of the big theme. And one of the key strategies is to have a sort of a consistent branding. Branding is basically, it not just like a marketing or sort of a traditional sort of a branding strategy, but more in terms of what kind of keywords you use in the publication that you publish. And even if you work on a project that's completely different from your PhD, you can still have that keyword in your publication so that you can show that you are working on a consistent theme throughout. So there are different ways for that you can sort of brand yourself. But you need to have that sort of game plan even before thinking about all these publications. You're not just doing random work. There's some sort of continuity. And like what Ben was saying, you might not be able to see that at that moment, but you need to step back and think about what are the big themes that relates to everything that I do. And if you nail that, you should be able to brand yourself through a set of strategies that I just talked about. Use the same keywords. Think about more consistency in your statement, your CV, and all that is about branding yourself. So I think that's something that we, the PhDs miss, because you're just focused on your own project. But you need to be thinking about how you represent yourself out there in the world.
I have a question. Are many of us in the audience, and I guess we're wrapping up, in a postdoc? How many are curious about getting a postdoc, or had a postdoc? Is there anyone else in the audience that?
Can I just respond to Shian's question in the chat really quick? We talked about, Ben and I both kind of said that like it is really important to talk about your publication goals up front, particularly if there's something like I was doing a book, and so that required some cost that I wanted to have, not a research assistant per se, but you could certainly use it for that. Maybe it's someone who makes maps for you, or someone who does some copy editing or indexing or some of those things, but similarly for articles. So I think that it's useful to, not only does it kind of show that you've thought about kind of your research agenda and your plan for the postdoc, but also again, like manages those expectations, which is part of that like trust and relationship building that Andy was talking about earlier today, is really useful. But then I don't know if you want to, or Andy, to build on that.
Yeah, I agree. I guess Kareem, you had asked earlier too, like what are some things that are different, or yeah, things that the postdoc didn't prepare me for, and I would just add to like all the admin, like, and so like when they bring you in to be ready to present yourself as an assistant professor, yes, you need to have like, I'm a brilliant researcher, I've got great research, I'm good at research, but like they also want you to like teach students and advise a lot of them and do some administrative roles and sit on committees. And like if you just come in and be a brilliant researcher and can't play in that sandbox, like that's not, it's not like fun to have around. So I think that is a difference between like PhD to postdoc, really emphasizing research, ability to do research, and then postdoc to assistant professor. It's like that plus like I can be a good colleague and I'm gonna like show up in the department, not just like be, Mr. Brilliant Researcher.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think just briefly, I think having that extra layer of experience and in admin, I think it's important when you're looking for a tenure track position, because they're not looking for I mean, obviously you have to be a brilliant researcher, but then you should be able to do other things as well, teaching, service, and admin, and all the other things. And in a way, going through the postdoc, you get training for that as well. And you have the opportunity to teach and be an instructor and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's an important piece that you can build on with your postdoc.
I think we're at time.